Penguin Random House Audio presents Charlie Hustle, The Rise and Fall of Pete Rose, and the Last Glory Days of Baseball, by Keith O'Brien. Read for you by Ellen Adair, with a note read by the author.
For the people in the bleachers on a warm summer day.
Anyone who would appraise Pete Rose would be wrong to do so by the numbers, for he is not so much a ball player as he is an emotion, an attitude, a symbol. Pete Rose, Commissioner Peter Ueberroth said, is baseball. He is, at least, what baseball ought to be. The Cincinnati Enquirer, September 12th, 1985. He can't run. He can't throw, and he doesn't have a good pair of hands. All he does is bust his tail and beat you. Dick Williams, manager of the Oakland Athletics. But this is a Pete Rose story. And Pete Rose had a gambling addiction. Pete's addiction got out of control. Tommy Giosa, friend and associate of Pete Rose.
Author's note. I grew up in Cincinnati when Pete Rose was at the peak of his fame, and I was there when he self-destructed, when he lost everything. I know the part of town where he grew up, the West Side, because briefly as a child, I lived there too. I went to school with guys like him, and like every Cincinnatian and every baseball fan who was alive during that time, I have felt just about every emotion about Pete Rose. Pride, disgust, frustration, pity, and confusion. Only one thing hasn't changed over the years: my fascination with his story. He was Icarus and red stirrup socks and cleats. He was the American dream, sliding headfirst into third. He was both a miracle and a disaster, and he still is today. This story is a work of nonfiction, built with the help of thousands of pages of previously unutilized federal court documents. Newly released FBI files that I requested and obtained, raw television footage, decades of newspaper articles, Major League Baseball's voluminous 1989 investigation into his misdeeds, and more than 150 hours of interviews with Pete Rose's friends, enemies, former teammates, family members, 2 former commissioners of baseball, 3 people who placed his bets on the game, 4 different investigators who dug up his secrets, the special counsel who led that charge, John Dowd, and Pete Rose himself. Rose met with me in person and spoke to me on the record for 27 hours in 2021, before he stopped calling back, before he shut down. The narrative takes no license with facts, characters, scenes, or chronologies. If you hear a direct quote here, it means it is verified, taken directly from a legal deposition, courtroom testimony, a memoir, a recorded interview, or a press account, or in rare instances, confirmed by reliable sources who were there. Every effort has been made to portray the events as they occurred, to depict emotions as they were felt at the time, and to document them as accurately as possible for history.
Introduction. September 1985. The standing ovation lasted for 7 minutes, long enough that the umpires stopped the game and the pitcher sat down on the mound. Seemingly bored and with nothing to do, the sad hurler for the visiting San Diego Padres crossed his arms and rested them on his knees, while the subject of the endless applause, the Cincinnati Reds player standing on first base, finally broke down. He finally cracked. Pete Rose began to cry. For more than 2 decades, baseball fans had come to expect raw emotion from Pete. It was part of both his public persona and his internal character. He sprinted out walks, slid headfirst into bases, shouted at pitchers to intimidate them, knocked over catchers at home plate, and once broke a man's shoulder in a meaningless game as he tried to score the winning run. But this, crying, was new for fans. And so, when the crowd at Riverfront Stadium in Cincinnati saw him bow his head, hide his eyes beneath his shiny red batting helmet, and wipe away his tears with his new white batting gloves, the people cheered even louder. They loved Pete even more on this warm night in September 1985 because he had done it. He was now the hit king. With his latest single, a clean, low-looping line drive to left center field off that pitcher for the Padres, Pete had compiled more hits than any other player in baseball history. 4,192. More than Cobb and Musial. More than Aaron and Mays. 700 more hits than Yaz. 1,200 more hits than the Babe. 1,500 more than Teddy Ballgame. Nearly double the total of Joltin' Joe, the Yankee Clipper, and as many as Bench and Berra combined. Pete had joined the list of the immortals, players known far and wide by a single name. Indeed, he had surpassed them, all of them, and he would never look back, in part because Pete isn't built for self-reflection, and in part because he would never have to re-examine this part of his story. Decades later, his hit record still stands. In a country where 25 million children might swing a bat every spring, and some 16,000 men have done it at the highest level, coming to the plate in a major league ball game with the dream of slapping a double down the line. No one has ever come close to matching Pete Rose's hit record, and they probably never will. It stands there like a monument to the man himself. Yet on this night in 1985, the fans in Cincinnati loved him for a different reason. For the reason they had always loved him, and for what they knew to be true. Pete Rose wasn't special. He was almost ordinary. Arguably, the most ordinary, extraordinary athlete in the history of American sports. Hardscrabble and gritty. Less talented than tough. A Rust Belt hero for a Rust Belt town. He was just like the fans, the people cheering him now on this night in September. He was white, working class, and Midwestern. And again the flash bulbs go off all over the ballpark, the city's radio play-by-play man cried from the press box over home plate. Hit number 4192. It's a slider inside, the television color man added in the next booth over, as the network replayed the record-breaking hit in slow motion. And Pete hits the ball probably like he's done 4,000 times, a line drive over shortstop. And right there, he knows it's a base hit. He knows that's it. And he rounds the bag the way he always does. All out. This is his game. It is his town, and it is his moment, still another broadcaster added. Then, in a pre-planned advertising stunt that's impossible to imagine today, the broadcaster stood up in the booth, turned toward the camera, hoisted a can of Budweiser, and toasted Pete on national television. This Bud's for Pete Rose, and baseball, the announcer said. Just breathe it in. On first base, in that moment, Pete exhaled and shook his head, acknowledged the crowd, looked up, and then looked down, and as his gaze settled on his customary black cleats, he would have seen them squarely planted on the infield dirt. Pete was safe at first, as usual. But the world had changed in the 25 years that he had been playing professional baseball, and it was changing still, even as Pete stood there at Riverfront Stadium that night, awash in the praise and the flashbulbs. The game that Pete had loved as a boy was no longer an unpolished American pastime populated by men who had learned to play by hitting bottle caps in the streets and who worked off-season jobs in the winter to survive. It had become a big business, where even the worst players made 3 times more than the average American. The biggest stars earned 10 times more than the President of the United States, and owners operated like modern-day rail...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?